It was a busy evening at the upscale restaurant in downtown Los Angeles. The kind of place where the white linen tablecloths are always crisp, and the chandeliers hang like glimmering stars in the sky. The air smelled faintly of garlic, fresh herbs, and an expensive red wine. The usual crowd, with their fine suits and designer dresses, murmured among themselves, the clinking of silverware mixing with soft jazz music in the background. Sarah Anderson, the new waitress at Le Chateau, shuffled nervously through the kitchen, adjusting her apron for the third time in an hour. This was her first high-end job. She had been a waitress at dive bars before, but this place was different. The pressure was higher, the expectations were immense, and the clientele? Well, they were a different breed altogether. She didn't have much experience in fine dining, but she was smart, determined, and had dreams of making it big. Her mom had worked 2 jobs her whole life to provide for Sarah, and she was doing everything she could to help her get through college. This job at Le Chateau was supposed to be a stepping stone, a way to help her pay tuition and eventually move up the ladder. But tonight, she was feeling the weight of it all. As she entered the main dining room, her gaze swept over the polished marble floors, the elegant tables set with perfect precision. She had to admit, the place had an air of old-world sophistication. But that didn't stop her nerves from bubbling up again. Tonight, Sarah was working a double shift, and it was already shaping up to be a disaster. Her first table had been a nightmare, a couple celebrating an anniversary who seemed intent on finding something to complain about. And now, she had just been assigned to a VIP table, a reservation that had been booked for months. At first, she didn't think much of it. After all, this was the type of place where celebrities and rich business moguls dined, so a VIP table wasn't out of the ordinary. But the moment she approached the table, she froze. There, sitting across from each other at the center of the room, was none other than Clint Eastwood. The legendary actor. The man whose face graced the cover of countless magazines, the man who had built an empire on his tough guy image. And yet, here he was, quietly sipping on his wine, wearing a simple gray blazer and a soft smile that didn't match his usually gruff persona. But to Sarah, he was just another celebrity, someone who probably expected special treatment like everyone else. "Good evening, sir," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. She didn't recognize him at first, she was too focused on her nerves. "Can I get you something to start with?" Clint looked up at her, his piercing blue eyes sizing her up. He didn't say anything for a moment, then glanced back at his companion, a woman with dark hair and a strikingly beautiful smile. He then turned back to Sarah and spoke in a low, calm voice. "Just the wine list for now. I'll let you know once we've decided." Sarah nodded quickly, giving a slight smile before she turned on her heel to grab the wine list. The restaurant was silent, save for the murmurs of other guests, and Sarah's footsteps echoed down the hallway. She could feel her heart racing. It wasn't often that she was starstruck, but Clint Eastwood. This was different. He was a legend, a Hollywood icon. And now, here he was, sitting at her table, and it was up to her to make sure he had the best dining experience of his life. When Sarah returned with the wine list, she felt the pressure building. She didn't know if she could keep it together. Trying her best to look composed, she walked back to the table. Clint was still looking at the menu, his brows slightly furrowed. He hadn't even glanced up when she arrived. "I'll give you a moment," she said, hoping her voice didn't tremble. But something about him rubbed her the wrong way. There was something distant about him, something aloof. Maybe it was the fact that he was a celebrity, or maybe it was just his no-nonsense attitude that reminded her of so many of the rich and entitled people she had met. She had dealt with demanding customers before, but this felt different. As Sarah stood there waiting for him to make a decision, she couldn't help but feel like she was being dismissed. She had a job to do, but it seemed as though he wasn't even going to acknowledge her unless it was absolutely necessary. Finally, he spoke, his voice still calm but with a hint of impatience. "You know, this place is a bit overhyped. I've been to better restaurants with much better service. Sarah's jaw tightened. She wasn't going to take this from anyone, especially not some rich Hollywood actor. Well, sir, she said, her tone sharper than she intended, if you think you've had better service, maybe it's time you give them another try. Clint raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her directness. But Sarah wasn't done. She wasn't about to let him get away with his arrogance. We're all doing our best here, and if that's not good enough for you, maybe you should consider dining somewhere else. We're doing the best we can. The moment those words left her lips, she realized what she had done. She had just insulted Clint Eastwood. His face remained unreadable, but Sarah's stomach sank. What had she done? Who did she think she was? Clint's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, everything around them went still. The world seemed to slow down, and she could feel every single nerve in her body. And then he finally spoke, his voice colder than before. You don't know who I am, do you? Sarah blinked, confused. I know exactly who you are, sir. Clint Eastwood. But that doesn't give you the right to talk down to people who are just trying to do their jobs. Clint's lips twitched, almost as if he were holding back a smile. You're right about one thing, he said, leaning back in his chair. I don't have the right to talk down to anyone. He paused, then continued, but maybe you should know this. I own this restaurant. Sarah froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Clint Eastwood, her customer, was the owner of the very place she worked. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She stood there, speechless, her face turning crimson. Clint simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Now, what were you saying about better service? The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. Sarah's hands trembled slightly, and her mind raced. How could she have been so careless? She had just insulted the man who owned the entire place. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Clint waited for her response, his gaze never leaving hers. As Sarah stood frozen in front of Clint Eastwood, the weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating her. The tension was unbearable, and her heart pounded in her chest. But beyond her immediate embarrassment, a wave of realization began to wash over her. This wasn't just about an uncomfortable situation with a customer, it was about her life, her struggles, and her constant battle to climb out of the hole she'd dug herself into. She had always been the underdog. Born to a single mother in a modest apartment on the outskirts of San Francisco, Sarah had never known luxury or ease. Her mother, Mary, worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Sarah had spent most of her childhood helping her mom clean the apartment, running errands, and taking care of things at home. She didn't mind the work, in fact, she respected her mother for the sacrifices she made. Mary had taught Sarah that hard work and determination were the keys to success, even if the odds seemed stacked against you. Growing up, Sarah didn't have the time or the energy to care about things like fancy clothes or the latest gadgets. She was more focused on surviving, on getting through the next day, the next week, the next year. But she dreamed. She dreamed of a life beyond the small apartment with peeling wallpaper and narrow streets. She dreamed of freedom, of not having to worry about the rent or whether there would be enough food on the table. Her mother had always told her that education was the way out. Get your degree, Sarah, Mary would say, her tired voice filled with hope. You get that degree, and you'll be able to make something of yourself. No more struggling. No more feeling like you're stuck. And so, Sarah had fought to get into college. She worked tirelessly to maintain her grades, often staying up late into the night to finish assignments or study for exams. The pressure was immense, but she kept her eyes on the prize. The scholarship she had earned to attend UCLA was her ticket to something bigger, a way out of the life she had known. But as soon as she arrived on campus, the reality of college life hit her hard. The cost of living in Los Angeles was astronomical, and her scholarship only covered part of her tuition. Sarah was left with two options: drop out or find a way to make ends meet. She chose the latter. The only jobs available were in the service industry, restaurants, bars, coffee shops. They didn't pay much, but they were flexible enough to fit around her class schedule. At first, Sarah worked as a barista at a local cafe, but it didn't take long for her to realize that the hours weren't enough, and the pay didn't come close to covering her expenses. So, she applied to Le Chateau, hoping it would be her big break. The interview process had been intimidating. The restaurant's reputation for high standards and demanding clientele made it clear that only the best would survive. But Sarah had made it through, impressing them with her drive and determination. She started working as a server, and although the learning curve was steep, she felt that she was finally on the path to something better. But tonight, as she stood before Clint Eastwood, her boss, whether she liked it or not, she couldn't help but wonder if she was out of her league. Here she was, barely making ends meet, while he, one of the most successful and revered actors of all time, was sitting at her table, his eyes fixed on her with an almost unnerving intensity. She couldn't help but replay the words that had come out of her mouth, the insult that had flown so carelessly from her lips. "Maybe you should consider dining somewhere else," she had said. What had she been thinking? Her mother's voice echoed in her head, reminding her of all the times she had been taught to respect authority, to be humble, to work hard, and to never, ever burn bridges. But now, standing in front of Clint, she had done just that. She had burned the bridge. "How could I be so stupid?" she muttered under her breath, the words barely audible. Clint's expression softened, though it was still unreadable. He didn't say anything for a long time, and Sarah could feel the seconds stretching into eternity. The quiet hum of the restaurant around them seemed to fade away, and she was left standing in the awkward silence, waiting for him to respond. Finally, Clint spoke. "I can see that you're upset, but let's be clear about something, Sarah." Sarah blinked, startled. You know my name." He nodded slowly. "I pay attention to my staff. I always do." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat dry. She could feel the sweat beading on her forehead, her hands clammy. This wasn't how she had imagined her first big mistake at Le Chateau. She had envisioned impressing everyone, learning the ropes, and moving up the ranks. She hadn't expected to be standing here, trying to apologize to Clint Eastwood. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to disrespect you. I was just frustrated. I've had a rough day, and I let it get the best of me." Clint looked at her for a moment, his blue eyes piercing through her. Sarah couldn't read him, couldn't figure out what he was thinking. For all she knew, he could fire her on the spot. But then, to her surprise, he leaned forward slightly and said, "It's okay. People make mistakes. What matters is how you handle them." Sarah blinked, shocked. She had expected anger, or at the very least, a scolding. Instead, he was offering understanding. "I'm not mad at you, Sarah," Clint continued, his voice surprisingly calm. "But you need to be careful. The way you speak to people matters. In this job, it's not just about the food or the service, it's about how you make people feel. And if you make them feel like they don't matter, well, that's when things go south." Sarah nodded, taking in his words. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Clint Eastwood, of all people, was teaching her something important, not just about the job, but about life itself. "I understand," she said, her voice steadier now. "I won't let it happen again." Clint gave her a small smile, the first one she had seen since she had approached the table. "Good. Now, let's start over. How about you tell me what's good on the menu tonight?" Sarah felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't a complete redemption, but it was a start. As she spoke about the specials, she couldn't help but think about how much she still had to learn, not just about the restaurant, but about herself. There were going to be more challenges ahead, more mistakes to make, but maybe, just maybe, this was the moment that could turn things around for her. The evening passed in a blur for Sarah. She busied herself with the orders, moving through the restaurant like an invisible force, her thoughts still racing after her awkward exchange with Clint Eastwood. She'd apologized, and he hadn't fired her. He hadn't even raised his voice. Instead, he'd given her advice, real, meaningful advice that made her feel like she wasn't just another waitress in the crowd. He'd made her feel like she mattered. And yet, the tension lingered in the air. Despite his calm demeanor, Clint was still the owner, the man with all the power in the restaurant. It wasn't lost on Sarah that she could be out of a job with a single call, that her future could be completely derailed if she messed up again. There was so much at stake, and the last thing she wanted was to blow this opportunity. Her mind was a whirlwind as she moved from table to table. The customers were still as demanding as ever, and her nerves never quite settled. At one point, a couple in their late 30s began debating over which bottle of wine to choose. Sarah, in an effort to be helpful, pointed out the sommelier's recommendation, but the woman sharply dismissed her suggestion, making a snide remark about how Sarah wouldn't know the first thing about fine wine. It wasn't the first time someone had undermined her. In fact, it happened frequently in this line of work. People treated waitstaff like they were invisible, like their opinions didn't matter. But Sarah had learned to brush it off. She had to. She couldn't let it get to her. Don't let them win, she muttered to herself under her breath, a mantra that had helped her survive the past few years. By the time Sarah made her way back to Clint's table to check on his order, she felt the weight of her exhaustion pressing down on her. It was well past 9, and the dining room was still bustling. The lights seemed dimmer, the noise louder. But when she reached Clint's table, something unexpected happened. He wasn't alone anymore. A man sat across from him, a man who was unmistakably familiar in a way Sarah couldn't quite place. His face was sharp and weathered, his hair salt and pepper, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that Sarah had only ever seen in the upper echelons of society. The man's presence commanded attention, even in a room full of power players. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should interrupt their conversation, but Clint looked up at her with a subtle wave of his hand. "Sarah," Clint greeted her, his tone casual yet firm. "This is Sam O'Connor." "Sam, this is Sarah, the young lady I was telling you about." Sarah gave a polite smile, the nerves creeping up again. She didn't know what Clint had told Sam, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. She extended her hand and shook Sam's firmly, noticing that his grip was strong and confident. He had the air of someone who wasn't easily impressed. Sam O'Connor. The name stuck in Sarah's mind, but she still couldn't place where she had heard it before. "I hope we're not interrupting you, Sarah," Sam said, his voice rich with an accent Sarah couldn't quite place. "Clint's told me you've been putting in a lot of hard work around here." Sarah felt a surge of pride, though she tried to hide it. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, her smile more genuine than before. Clint chuckled, but his eyes remained calculating. "Don't be too modest. Not many people can handle the pressure here. You're doing fine." It was the kind of compliment that made Sarah's heart flutter, but she quickly pushed it down. She had to remain professional, especially with Clint watching. She wasn't about to let herself get distracted. "Well, I'll leave you to it," Sarah said, feeling suddenly out of place. "Let me know if you need anything else." But before she could retreat, Clint's voice stopped her. "Actually, Sarah," he said, his gaze focused on her with intensity. "You've been handling things well tonight. Sam and I were discussing some things, and I think you might be ready for a little more responsibility." Sarah blinked, caught off guard. Responsibility? More responsibility? She had barely made it through her first few weeks at Le Chateau without major hiccups. Was he really considering giving her more work? Clint seemed to sense her hesitation. "You've got the drive. I see that. That's why I'm thinking of moving you up, maybe in a supervisory position. He leaned back in his chair, glancing at Sam, who gave a small nod of approval. What do you think? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A supervisory role. The thought was thrilling, but at the same time, terrifying. She wasn't sure if she was ready. There was still so much she didn't know about running things behind the scenes. The pressure was overwhelming. I don't know, she replied hesitantly, trying to gather her thoughts. I mean, I'd be honored, but I don't want to mess things up. I don't have a lot of experience with managing people. Clint studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. It's okay to be unsure. You'll learn. I can teach you. It was that same calm reassurance that had diffused the tension earlier when she'd insulted him. Clint Eastwood wasn't a man who rushed decisions. He didn't hand out praise lightly, and he certainly didn't offer opportunities unless he thought someone had earned them. The realization hit Sarah like a tidal wave. This was her chance, her opportunity to prove herself. But the question was, could she handle it? Could she rise to the occasion and make it through the inevitable challenges that would come her way? The weight of the decision hung over her, but before she could respond, Clint continued, take the rest of the night to think it over. You can tell me tomorrow if you're interested. Sarah nodded, feeling both the pressure and the promise of the opportunity in his words. As she walked away, she couldn't help but replay the conversation in her head. This was a moment that could change everything for her, if she could rise to the challenge. If she could prove to herself that she was more than just a waitress in the background. But for now, there was still the rest of the night to get through. The kitchen was still buzzing with orders, and the tables were still filled with demanding customers. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to take a very different turn. The rest of the evening was a blur of orders and interactions, but Sarah's mind kept returning to the conversation she had with Clint and Sam O'Connor. She couldn't stop thinking about the potential opportunity he had offered her, a chance to move up, to prove herself in a way she'd never expected. It was a chance to make something of herself beyond just being another waitress at Le Chateau. But with the excitement came the anxiety. Sarah knew the restaurant business well enough to understand that it wasn't all glitz and glamour. There were long hours, grueling work, and constant pressure to perform. And now, with the possibility of a supervisory role looming over her, she couldn't help but feel a wave of doubt creeping in. She had worked hard to get where she was, but managing people. The responsibility was something entirely different. She had seen how the other supervisors handled the chaos of the restaurant, their ability to juggle the needs of the customers, the kitchen, and the staff while maintaining a calm composure. It was impressive, but it was also daunting. By the time Sarah finished her shift, the night air outside felt like a welcome relief from the intense energy of the restaurant. She stepped into the cool evening, pulling her jacket tighter against her body as she made her way to her car. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, caught between the promise of something better and the fear of not being good enough. Driving home that night, her mind was filled with scenarios. What if she said yes to Clint's offer and failed? What if she couldn't handle the pressure? What if she lost everything, the little progress she had made, and ended up back at square one? The familiar streets of her neighborhood offered no answers. When she pulled into the driveway of her modest apartment, the reality of her life outside the restaurant hit her. It wasn't the life she wanted, but it was the life she knew. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her to never settle, to always aim higher. But even Mary had never been given the opportunities that Sarah now had. The thought of her mother's sacrifices, the long hours, the missed moments, made Sarah's heart ache. She had promised her mother that she would make something of herself, that she would find a way to make their lives better. Inside her apartment, Sarah set her keys on the counter and collapsed onto the couch, her head spinning. The weight of the decision felt heavy, but it wasn't just about her. If she took the job, it could change everything, not just for her, but for her mom too. It could be the break they needed. But would she be ready for the challenge? The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of urgency. She had spent the night tossing and turning, thinking about the opportunity Clint had given her. But it wasn't just the chance to prove herself that kept her up, it was the fear of failing, of being exposed as someone who wasn't cut out for more responsibility. She dressed quickly, barely taking a moment to look at herself in the mirror. The truth was, she had never been one to spend much time thinking about her appearance. She wasn't insecure about her looks, she just didn't have the luxury of time to focus on things like that. Today, however, was different. Today, she would make a decision that could alter the course of her life. And the reality of it all seemed overwhelming. At work, the atmosphere was much the same as always, busy, bustling, with the constant hum of conversation and clinking glasses. But the weight of her conversation with Clint the night before made everything feel sharper, more intense. It wasn't just another shift. She was about to make a decision that could change everything. As the day wore on, Clint found her in the back of the restaurant, wiping down a counter. He was as calm as ever, but there was something different in the way he looked at her now. He wasn't just the owner of the restaurant anymore. He was the man offering her a chance to grow, to prove herself, to become someone more than she had ever imagined. "Sarah," Clint said, his voice steady. "Have you thought about my offer?" She looked up at him, her nerves flaring. "Yes. I've been thinking about it a lot, actually." "And?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice betraying a mixture of vulnerability and uncertainty. "I don't have the experience to manage people, Clint. I've never had that kind of responsibility before. I'm afraid I'll fail." Clint studied her for a moment, then took a step closer. "I didn't think you'd have all the answers right away. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to take the first step. If you're willing to learn, willing to put in the work, I believe you can do it. But only you can decide if it's the right time." Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. The weight of his words settled in her chest, and for a moment, she felt the full weight of the opportunity in front of her. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but the truth was, she had never been ready for anything in her life. She had always been learning, always adapting, and now, she had the chance to take control of her future. "I'll do it," she said, the words feeling both liberating and terrifying. "I'll give it a shot." Clint nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Good. I'll make the arrangements, and we'll start training you for the role next week. It's not going to be easy, but I'm confident you'll rise to the occasion." Sarah's heart raced with excitement and fear, but she felt a strange sense of resolve settle over her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The journey was about to get harder, the stakes were higher, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. The first few days of Sarah's new role felt like a blur. She spent every waking moment trying to absorb as much information as she could, learning the ins and outs of managing the floor, working with the other servers, and making sure the restaurant ran smoothly. Clint had given her a crash course on handling the responsibilities of being a supervisor, and while he was supportive, the weight of it all was crushing at times. But Sarah wasn't backing down. She couldn't. Every morning, she reviewed the schedule, met with the other staff to discuss expectations, and shadowed Clint as he ran the business with his usual calm authority. It wasn't easy. Her confidence was constantly tested by the many challenges she faced on the job, and she still felt like a small fish in a big pond. There were moments when she doubted herself, moments when she wondered if she had made the right choice. It was on a Thursday afternoon, during the lunch rush, when everything began to come to a head. The restaurant was packed, as usual, with the usual mix of regulars, tourists, and businesspeople looking for a quick bite. The noise level was deafening as people chattered away over their meals, the clink of silverware and glass adding to the soundtrack of the bustling space. Sarah was making her rounds, checking on tables, ensuring that drinks were refilled and that customers were satisfied with their meals. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until she heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. She had learned early on that when the kitchen staff got upset, it usually meant trouble. She quickly made her way to the back, her heart rate picking up. "Clint," she called out, searching the kitchen for him. "What's going on?" Clint was standing near the prep station, his brow furrowed in concentration as he spoke to the head chef, Marco. "It's a mess," Marco snapped, wiping his hands on his apron. "The orders are getting backed up, and some of the tickets are mixed up. We've got too many tables and not enough hands. We're behind." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had seen this happen before, a restaurant operating at full capacity, with the kitchen struggling to keep up. The anxiety in the air was palpable, and she could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Clint, ever the calm presence, took a deep breath. "Marco, we're going to get this handled. Let's work together, all right?" He turned to Sarah. "You need to go check on the front. Make sure the guests are kept calm. We can't afford to let this spiral." Nodding quickly, Sarah rushed back to the dining area. As soon as she stepped out into the main room, she could see the frustration building among the guests. Some were tapping their fingers impatiently on the table, others were giving her pointed glares as they waited for their food. She couldn't afford to let this situation escalate. She had to act fast. She approached a table near the window, where a group of 3 businessmen were seated. Their drinks were empty, their plates had been cleared, but their food was nowhere to be seen. The tension in the air was thick, and Sarah knew that if she didn't handle it right, things could go south fast. "I'm terribly sorry for the delay," she said with a forced smile. "I'm going to check with the kitchen and make sure your meals are on their way. Please bear with me." The men barely acknowledged her. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a cold stare, looked up and gave her a brief nod. "I've been waiting for 20 minutes. We're on a tight schedule." "I understand, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside her. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure your order is prioritized. Please trust me, I'll get it to you as soon as possible." As she walked away, Sarah could feel the eyes of the other diners on her. Some were silently judging, others were just as impatient as the businessmen. But she couldn't let it show. She had to keep her cool. She reached the kitchen and found Clint talking to Marco again, trying to get everything back on track. "We're falling behind, Clint," Marco muttered. "If we don't get these orders out soon, we're going to have a full-blown disaster." Clint sighed, looking at Sarah. "We've got to push through. We don't have a choice." Sarah swallowed hard, trying to keep the panic at bay. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "I'll go out and apologize to the customers. I'll make sure they know we're doing our best." Clint gave her a small, approving nod. "Good. Just keep them calm. We'll handle the rest." As Sarah stepped back into the dining room, the pressure seemed to mount. It wasn't just about delivering food now, it was about managing expectations, controlling the room, and keeping the atmosphere from exploding. Every minute felt like a test, and Sarah was acutely aware that the success of the entire evening depended on how she handled this situation. She made her way to another table, where a woman was tapping her watch impatiently. "I've been waiting for over 30 minutes, she said, her tone sharp. "This is unacceptable." "I completely understand," Sarah said, offering her best smile. "We've had a bit of a backlog in the kitchen, but your meal is on its way. We're working as fast as we can to get everything out. Can I bring you another drink while you wait?" The woman sighed but nodded, clearly not happy. Sarah could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her as she moved between tables, offering apologies, keeping spirits high, and trying to maintain the delicate balance of calm and urgency that the situation demanded. But despite her best efforts, things didn't improve. The orders kept piling up, and soon, the entire restaurant was buzzing with complaints. Sarah could hear the tension building in the air, and she could feel herself becoming overwhelmed. And then, just when it seemed like everything might come crashing down, Clint appeared by her side. "You're doing great, Sarah," he said, his voice low but firm. "I know it's a lot, but you're handling it well." Something in his words grounded her. Clint's presence, as always, was steadying. It reminded Sarah of the calm she needed to find within herself to get through this chaos. She took a deep breath, nodded, and returned to her task, her resolve stronger than before. Despite the mounting tension and the pressure, Sarah pressed on. She could feel the emotional climax of the night building, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her, but with each passing minute, she knew she was getting stronger. This was the moment that would define her. The storm of the lunch rush had finally passed. The last few customers were finishing up their meals, the din of conversation slowly fading away as the restaurant started to empty. Sarah stood in the middle of the floor, feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones. Her shoulders ached, her feet were sore, and her mind was reeling from the intense pressure of the last few hours. But there was something else that filled her, something she hadn't expected: pride. Despite the chaos, despite the anxiety in the moments of doubt, Sarah had made it through. She had handled it. She had stepped up in ways she never thought she could. And that realization, though still a bit surreal, was starting to sink in. Clint found her standing near the bar, wiping down glasses. His expression was calm, but there was a glimmer of approval in his eyes that made Sarah's chest swell with gratitude. "You did well today," he said, his voice low but steady. "I saw you handling the pressure, managing the floor like you've been doing this for years. I'm proud of you." Sarah glanced up at him, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a little. "It was tough," she admitted, her voice betraying the exhaustion she felt. "I wasn't sure I was going to make it." Clint gave her a small smile. "That's the test. It's not about getting through it perfectly. It's about learning to manage the pressure, to stay composed when everything feels like it's falling apart. You've got that now." Her heart swelled with emotion, a mix of pride and relief. She had faced the storm, and she had made it through. But Clint's words lingered in her mind: "It's not about perfection. It's about resilience." As the evening shift started, Sarah found herself looking at the restaurant with a new perspective. She had always admired Clint's ability to manage the chaos, to move through each moment with grace and authority. But now, she realized, it wasn't magic. It was hard work. It was sacrifice. It was knowing that failure wasn't the end, it was just part of the process. And for the first time, Sarah felt like she belonged here. Like she had earned her place, not just as a waitress, but as a part of the team, a leader in her own right. The next few weeks passed by in a blur. Sarah continued to handle her responsibilities with growing confidence. There were still challenges, of course, there always would be. But she had learned to face them head-on, to navigate the uncertainty and chaos with a calmness that surprised even her. There were moments when she still doubted herself, those quiet moments late at night when she was alone in her apartment, her thoughts swirling. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she wasn't cut out for this? But those doubts didn't control her anymore. She had learned to trust herself, to lean into the discomfort and keep moving forward. One evening, Clint pulled her aside after the shift. "I've been thinking about your progress, Sarah," he said, his tone serious but kind. "You've shown a lot of promise. I think it's time for the next step." Her heart skipped a beat. "Next step?" Clint nodded. "I want to offer you a permanent supervisory role. You've proven that you can handle the responsibility, and I believe you're ready to take on more." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah felt like the ground beneath her feet had shifted. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, it felt almost unreal. But she was ready. She had earned it. She had worked for this moment, and now it was hers. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, though her chest was tight with emotion. "I won't let you down." Clint smiled, a rare, warm smile. I know you won't. That night, as Sarah left the restaurant, the cool night air felt different. It was like the world was stretching out in front of her, full of possibilities. She had been given an opportunity to rise, to change the course of her life. And she wasn't going to waste it. As she walked to her car, she reflected on everything that had brought her here. The sleepless nights, the doubts, the struggles, but also the triumphs, the small victories that had built her confidence, one day at a time. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about the person she was becoming. Life is full of surprises, she thought as she started her car and drove down the quiet street. But love, hard work, and a little bit of belief in yourself can make all the difference. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she glanced down. It was a text from her mom. So proud of you, honey. You're making it happen. Keep going. I believe in you. Sarah smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek as she read the message. She had made it. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And the road ahead, though still uncertain, felt like a journey she was finally ready to embrace. She had found her strength, and it was stronger than she had ever known. Sarah's promotion was just the beginning. The quiet confidence she felt in the aftermath of her triumph quickly gave way to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be in a leadership position. She had barely begun to scratch the surface of what it took to truly manage a restaurant, and now, as a supervisor, she would face new challenges, ones that would test her not only as an employee but as a leader. The next few weeks were filled with learning and growing pains. Sarah quickly realized that her role was far more complex than she had anticipated. Managing a team of servers, balancing customer needs, and keeping the kitchen running smoothly was no easy task. But with Clint's guidance, she was starting to get the hang of it. However, the true test came on a particularly busy Saturday evening. The restaurant had a reservation list packed with high-profile customers, including a corporate party from a nearby tech firm and a celebrity chef who had recently made waves on a cooking show. Sarah had heard rumors that Clint was working on bringing in big names, and tonight, it was finally happening. The pressure was on, and everyone could feel it. Sarah had just finished greeting the first round of customers when Clint pulled her aside. "Sarah, I need you to take the lead tonight," he said, his voice firm but calm. "This is a big night for the restaurant, and I'm counting on you to keep things running smoothly." Her heart raced. This wasn't just any ordinary night, it was the kind of night where everything had to go right, and the stakes were higher than ever. "I'll do my best," Sarah said, her nerves starting to bubble up despite her best efforts to stay composed. Clint smiled at her, a reassuring gesture. "I know you will." As the evening progressed, the restaurant became more and more hectic. The reservations were coming in fast, and the staff was working at full speed to keep up. The kitchen was buzzing with activity, the servers were darting between tables, and the air was thick with tension. Sarah moved between the dining area and the kitchen, checking in with everyone, making sure the customers were happy, and keeping a steady hand on the operations. But the night wasn't without its hiccups. At one point, a mix-up in the orders led to a delay in delivering the meals to one of the VIP tables, causing the group to grow frustrated. Sarah was on edge, but she handled the situation with grace, apologizing profusely and offering complimentary drinks while the kitchen worked to fix the problem. Then, disaster struck. A water pipe in the back of the restaurant burst, flooding the storage area. The sound of rushing water echoed through the halls, and Sarah's stomach dropped. It was the kind of problem she had hoped to never face, and yet here it was, happening in the middle of one of the busiest nights in the restaurant's history. "Clint!" Sarah called out, rushing to the back to find him. "We've got a major issue in the storage room. We need to stop the leak before it spreads any further." Clint immediately took charge, barking orders to the maintenance team to shut off the water supply. Sarah, meanwhile, rushed to inform the staff and keep the customers unaware of the situation. There was no time for panic, there was only time to act. As she darted between the back and front of the house, the stress began to mount. But Sarah kept her cool. She couldn't afford to let the team see her falter. The pipes were finally under control, and the kitchen staff was working quickly to recover from the mess. As the night wore on, things finally started to settle. The tech firm party had left, pleased with the service despite the initial hiccup, and the celebrity chef seemed content with his meal. The customers who had been left waiting earlier were happy again, and the staff was starting to wind down. When the last customers left, Sarah found herself standing in the quiet, empty restaurant, breathing a sigh of relief. Clint came up behind her, clapping her on the back. "Not bad, Sarah. You handled that better than I expected," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Sarah, exhausted but proud, turned to him. "That was chaos. I didn't think I was going to make it." Clint laughed. "Welcome to the world of restaurant management. It's never easy, but you did great tonight." Her heart swelled at his words. It wasn't just about getting through the night, it was about how she handled the obstacles that had come her way. She had kept her head when everything around her was crumbling, and that was what made her a leader. But just as she thought the night was winding down, Clint's phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. He glanced at the screen, his face immediately tightening. "Sarah, we've got another problem," Clint said, his tone serious. The restaurant's regular supplier had an issue with their delivery. "We're out of a lot of critical ingredients for tomorrow's brunch rush. If we don't get it resolved by morning, we're in trouble." The weight of the new challenge sank in, and Sarah felt the familiar sense of dread creeping in again. But then she reminded herself, this was just another hurdle. Another test of her resilience. "All right," she said, taking a deep breath. "Let's figure this out." And with that, she knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There would be moments when everything seemed impossible, but Sarah was no longer afraid. She had the tools she needed to face whatever came her way. She had learned the hard way that leadership wasn't just about having all the answers, it was about adapting, learning from mistakes, and staying grounded no matter how chaotic the world around you became. As Clint and Sarah made plans to resolve the supply issue, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had come a long way from the unsure, anxious waitress who had first walked into the restaurant months ago. She was becoming the leader she had always hoped she could be, and with each new challenge, she knew she was only getting stronger. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. She had the skills, the resilience, and the determination to face whatever came her way. And this time, she wasn't just doing it for herself, she was doing it for the team, for Clint, and for the restaurant that had given her a chance to grow. Sarah's life had changed in ways she couldn't have predicted when she first started at the restaurant. From uncertain newbie to a supervisor with a growing reputation, she had come a long way. But beneath the surface of all the busy shifts and progress, there were still unseen struggles, the ones that didn't show up in the daily chaos, but weighed heavily on her heart. It wasn't just the work itself. It was the loneliness, the quiet moments after the restaurant had closed for the night, when Sarah sat in her car, staring out at the city streets. She had always been independent, but the cost of success had been more than just long hours. It had come with emotional sacrifices she hadn't anticipated. Her personal life had become a casualty. Her relationship with her mom, which used to be filled with late-night phone calls and weekend visits, had started to fray. She didn't have time for the people she cared about. Friends had drifted away, and her evenings were filled with work, leaving her with little to show for it other than the satisfaction of a job well done. One night, after a particularly challenging shift, Sarah sat in the break room staring at her phone. Her mom had sent a text hours ago, something simple, just checking in. "Hope you're doing okay. I miss you." Sarah hadn't responded. She hadn't had the energy. The guilt gnawed at her. Her mom had always been there for her, supporting her when Sarah had been unsure of herself. But now that Sarah was starting to find her footing, she felt like she had nothing left to give. It wasn't that she didn't care, it was just that she didn't know how to balance it all. As Sarah lingered in the break room, her thoughts were interrupted by Clint walking in, his usual confident stride tempered by a tiredness in his eyes. He smiled at her, though it was clear it wasn't the usual smile of someone who had just wrapped up a busy shift. "Hey," Clint greeted her, taking a seat across from her. "You hanging in there?" Sarah managed a tired smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just another night in paradise." Clint raised an eyebrow, sensing something deeper. "You don't seem like you're all there. Everything okay?" Sarah hesitated. It was hard to open up, especially to Clint. He had always been the one who seemed to have it all together, calm, composed, never flustered. She had admired that about him, but at that moment, it only made her feel more alone. I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so focused on work, and it's starting to feel like I'm losing everything else. I don't have time for anything or anyone, not even my mom. I keep telling myself I'll make it up to her, but I don't even know if she understands how much I'm trying to do." Clint sat quietly, listening intently. He didn't interrupt, allowing her the space to speak her mind. "I feel like I'm stuck in this cycle," Sarah continued. "The restaurant needs me, and I want to be there for it, but I don't know how to be there for the people who matter anymore." Clint looked at her for a long moment before responding. "Sarah, I know what it's like to feel like you have to choose between work and your personal life. It's a hard balance, and sometimes it feels impossible. But here's the thing, no one can pour from an empty cup. If you don't take care of yourself and the people who support you, eventually, you're going to burn out." She bit her lip, absorbing his words. I feel like I can't afford to stop. Not now. Not after everything that's happened." "You can't afford not to, either," Clint replied, his voice soft but firm. "You've made a lot of progress, Sarah, but at what cost? Work will always be there. The restaurant will still need you, but the people in your life won't always be. If you don't make time for them now, when will you?" Sarah looked at him, his words sinking deep. She had always known that there had to be more to life than work. But somehow, she had gotten so caught up in proving herself that she had forgotten about the people who mattered most. "I'll try," she said finally, the weight of his words heavy in the air. "I'll try to do better." Clint gave her a knowing nod. "That's all you can do. Just remember, you don't have to do it all alone. You've got a team here, and we've got your back." As Sarah left the break room later that night, she couldn't help but reflect on Clint's advice. It wasn't just about being a better leader at the restaurant, it was about being a better person, too. There was a need for balance, for connection, and for taking the time to nurture the relationships that mattered. She pulled out her phone as she walked to her car, composing a text to her mom, "I'm so sorry I haven't been in touch. I've been caught up with work, but I miss you. Let's talk soon, okay?" As she hit send, Sarah felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't a huge step, but it was a start. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to have it all figured out. But she could take small steps to make things right. And as for the restaurant, she would keep doing her best, but she would also make sure she took time for the people she loved. After all, the restaurant wasn't her only family. And as much as she had grown through her work, she knew that the relationships she built outside of it were just as important. The road ahead would be difficult, she knew that. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she could breathe. She was no longer just working for the future, she was living in the present, balancing the work she loved with the relationships she cherished. And that, she realized, was the true measure of success. The weeks following Sarah's late-night conversation with Clint had been filled with changes. She was working hard to strike a better balance between her professional and personal life, and though it wasn't easy, she was determined to make it work. She was reaching out to her mom more, even scheduling weekend visits when she could. Slowly but surely, the tension that had built between them began to dissolve. But even as Sarah found her footing in one part of her life, another challenge was lurking around the corner. One Tuesday evening, just as Sarah was getting ready to start her shift, Clint approached her with a look that immediately told her something was up. He was holding a folder in his hand, the edges slightly crumpled from his grip. His usual confident demeanor seemed a little less certain than usual, and Sarah immediately felt her stomach drop. "Hey, Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute?" Clint's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Of course," she said, her voice laced with concern. She had never seen him like this before. She followed him into the back office, where he closed the door behind them, the weight of the moment growing heavier by the second. "I just got off the phone with the restaurant's main supplier," Clint started, his tone grave. "There's been an issue. A big issue." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew from experience that when Clint said big issue, it usually meant trouble. "It's a shipment mix-up?" she asked, hoping it was something that could be easily fixed. Clint shook his head, frustration flashing in his eyes. "Worse. They're going out of business. Their supplier is pulling the contract, and that's going to leave us without a lot of key ingredients we rely on. We can't afford to wait for them to sort it out, they're done for. This is going to hit us hard, especially with the weekend crowd coming up." Sarah stared at Clint, stunned. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, this was a full-blown crisis. The restaurant relied on these suppliers for some of their most popular dishes. Without these key ingredients, entire menu items could be wiped out. The thought of losing so many beloved dishes was overwhelming, and the ripple effect on the restaurant's reputation could be catastrophic. "So, what are we going to do?" Sarah asked, trying to stay calm, though panic was creeping up on her. "Do we need to find a new supplier?" "I'm working on that," Clint said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "But even if we find someone else, it'll take time for them to deliver. We're looking at a major loss in inventory, and we don't have enough time to turn things around by the weekend." Sarah thought for a moment, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. This wasn't just a matter of finding new suppliers, it was a matter of adjusting the entire menu and pivoting to a new strategy. "We could rework the menu," she suggested, her voice growing more determined. "Offer specials with ingredients we still have on hand. Keep the most popular dishes but remove the ones that depend on the missing supplies." Clint nodded, his eyes lighting up with a spark of hope. "That's a great idea, Sarah. We'll need to adjust fast, but it's doable. I'll need your help to work with the kitchen on the changes, and we'll need to make sure the servers are up to speed on the new menu." "I'm on it," Sarah said, feeling a surge of confidence. This was her moment to show Clint that she could handle the pressure. She had faced challenges before, and she knew how to think on her feet. This wouldn't be any different. With the plan in place, Sarah dove into action. She spent the next several hours working with the kitchen staff to rework the menu. She helped Chef Carlos come up with new specials that used the ingredients they had in abundance, and together, they streamlined the offerings to ensure that the dishes would still feel fresh and exciting. Meanwhile, Sarah rallied the servers, updating them on the changes and making sure they were prepared to explain the new menu to customers. She could see the concern on their faces as they processed the information, but Sarah was careful to reassure them that the changes weren't permanent. They just had to get through this rough patch. The next few days were a blur. Sarah worked tirelessly, balancing the logistics of the menu changes with the day-to-day operations. Clint was a constant presence, guiding her through every decision and offering feedback as they made adjustments. By Thursday, the new menu was in place, and the team was ready to face the first big test, the weekend rush. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone braced themselves for what was to come. The restaurant was fully booked, and Sarah knew that if they could pull this off, it would be a huge victory for the team. As the first customers began to arrive on Friday night, Sarah's heart raced. But she reminded herself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time she had faced a challenge at work, and it wouldn't be the last. She moved through the dining area, checking in with the staff, making sure that the kitchen was running smoothly, and ensuring that every customer was satisfied. The night was a whirlwind. The servers were working hard to keep up with the new orders, and the kitchen was hustling to prepare the specials. Sarah was everywhere at once, adjusting to the rhythm of the night and making sure that no detail was overlooked. By the end of the night, as the last customers left and the staff began to clean up, Sarah stood in the middle of the dining room, exhausted but exhilarated. Clint walked over to her, his eyes tired but proud. "You did it, Sarah. You pulled it off," he said, a wide grin spreading across his face. She smiled back, feeling the weight of the accomplishment settle in. "We did it, Clint. We all did." It had been a tough week, but they had made it through. The restaurant had survived, and Sarah had proved to herself that she could handle whatever came her way. As Clint clapped her on the back and walked toward the office, Sarah paused for a moment, taking in the quiet hum of the empty restaurant. She had been tested like never before, and she had come through stronger, more capable, and more confident in her abilities. But as the adrenaline of the evening wore off, Sarah knew one thing for sure: this was just one challenge of many. The road ahead would be full of obstacles, but she was ready for them. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a leader, a manager, and the journey she had embarked on was far from over. The restaurant was bustling with its usual mix of customers, a mix of familiar regulars and curious newcomers. Sarah was in the kitchen, working alongside Chef Carlos to ensure the night went smoothly. Her sense of control had grown, but every day was still a challenge. She had come a long way from the rookie waitress who had once struggled with the complexities of the job. Now, she was a manager, helping lead the restaurant through both smooth and rocky times. But tonight felt different. As Sarah was adjusting the seating chart and ensuring there were enough servers for the tables, the front door opened with a slight jingle. Sarah glanced up from her clipboard, her eyes scanning the crowd. It was just another group of guests, or so she thought. Standing in the doorway was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sharp suit, his features striking and his confidence undeniable. His presence seemed to demand attention without saying a word. Sarah's eyes widened when she recognized him. It was Clint Eastwood, Hollywood legend, cultural icon, and the last person she expected to see walking through the restaurant's door. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of joke? She had heard the rumors about Clint Eastwood visiting the restaurant once or twice, but no one had taken them seriously. Now, here he was, standing just a few feet away from her, looking just as stoic as he did on screen. "Hi, can I help you?" Sarah asked, her voice a little shakier than she intended. She immediately regretted not being more composed, but who could blame her? It was Clint Eastwood standing there, not some anonymous guest. Clint gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I believe you can," he replied, his gravelly voice resonating in the air. "I'd like a table for one, if you've got one." "Of course," Sarah stammered, quickly regaining her composure. "Right this way." She led him to a quiet corner of the restaurant, trying to steady her nerves. This was a moment she'd never forget, but she couldn't let her starstruck feelings affect her work. This was business as usual. As she pulled out the chair for Clint, she noticed him scanning the menu with practiced ease. There was an air of authority about him that made Sarah's respect for him grow even more. It wasn't just his fame, it was his presence. Clint had a way of commanding a room without raising his voice. "I'll have the special tonight," Clint said, looking up from the menu with a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I hear it's good." Sarah nodded, trying her best to maintain professionalism despite the flurry of thoughts racing through her mind. "Excellent choice. Our chef puts a lot of effort into it." She left him to relax at the table, her heart still racing from the surreal experience. She couldn't help but wonder, what was Clint Eastwood doing in her restaurant? Had he heard about it through some friend, or was this purely a coincidence? As the night went on, Sarah checked in on Clint's table periodically. Each time, she was careful to maintain the usual level of service, despite the excitement building up inside of her. It wasn't just the celebrity sighting that had her on edge, there was something else. She couldn't shake the feeling that Clint was watching her closely, as if observing her every move. Finally, when the night started to wind down and the restaurant grew quieter, Sarah found herself walking past Clint's table again. This time, he caught her eye and gave her a nod. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Clint asked, his voice low but firm. Sarah swallowed, trying to keep her cool. "Of course, Mr. Eastwood. Is everything all right with your meal?" "Everything's fine," he replied. "But I need to talk to you about something else. Something important." Her pulse quickened. What could he possibly want with her? It wasn't like she was some high-ranking manager with years of experience under her belt. But here he was, looking at her like she was the one who could make a difference. "Please, have a seat," Clint said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I won't bite." Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then sat down, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this some kind of audition? Did he want her opinion on something? "I was watching you tonight," Clint began, his gaze unwavering. "You're a natural at this. You've got a presence about you, a way of handling everything with ease. I've seen a lot of people come and go, but you've got something different. You're not just running a restaurant, you're leading it." Sarah was taken aback. Was he complimenting her? She had always admired Clint for his strength and confidence, and hearing him say something like that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "I've been working hard to get better at this job, but it's not easy. It's a constant challenge." Clint nodded. "I can tell. But that's what makes the difference. You're willing to put in the work. That's the kind of person I like to work with." Sarah blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "Work with you? What do you mean?" Clint's eyes gleamed with a mix of seriousness and something else, something like an opportunity. "I own this place," he said simply. Sarah froze, her mind struggling to process what he had just said. "Wait, what? You own this restaurant?" Clint smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Surprised?" "You never mentioned anything about it," Sarah said, still trying to wrap her head around it. "I had no idea you were involved with this place." Clint chuckled. "I don't exactly go around broadcasting it. But I've been watching the way you've been handling things here. I think you've got a lot of potential. I'm willing to invest in that potential." Sarah's heart raced again. What was he offering? She had to be careful, but at the same time, this was Clint Eastwood, an offer from him could mean everything. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger," Clint said, his tone steady. "You've got the skills, the work ethic. All you need now is the right opportunity. And I think you could make this place even better." Sarah sat there, stunned. She hadn't expected her night to take such a dramatic turn. Clint Eastwood wasn't just a Hollywood icon, he was now offering her a chance to change the course of her career. Her mind raced. This was the moment that could define everything for her. But the question was she ready for what lay ahead? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. If you had the chance to work with someone like Clint Eastwood, would you take it? What would your next step be? For Sarah, the door had just opened to a new world, one that promised both excitement and uncertainty. And now, the only thing left to do was decide whether she had the courage to step through it. Sarah sat in stunned silence as Clint Eastwood's words hung in the air like a weight pressing down on her chest. She hadn't expected this, had never in a million years thought that the legendary actor would offer her a chance to be part of something bigger. His gaze was steady, his face calm, but there was something undeniably serious in the way he looked at her, as if he were waiting for her to respond. For a moment, Sarah felt like everything around her had faded. The clattering of dishes, the hum of conversations, and the soft background music all disappeared, leaving only the steady beat of her own heart in her ears. Clint Eastwood, the Clint Eastwood, was offering her a chance to work with him, to be part of something he had built. He didn't just see her as a waitress or even as a manager in a restaurant. He saw something in her that she had only just begun to recognize in herself. But was she ready for this? Was she ready to step up, to take on a role that could change the trajectory of her life? Her thoughts were a whirlwind. She had spent so long trying to prove herself at the restaurant, fighting to make sure things ran smoothly, dealing with customers, learning the ins and outs of management, and trying to balance her life outside of work. It had been exhausting, yet fulfilling. But this was a whole new level. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes searching Clint's face for any sign that this was some kind of joke or misunderstanding. Clint leaned forward slightly, folding his arms across the table, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because you've got something I don't see every day. You don't just show up to work, you take charge. You lead without forcing it, and people listen to you. They respect you. I've been around a long time, Sarah, and I know talent when I see it." Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at his words. But the reality of what Clint was offering still hit her like a ton of bricks. "But this is Clint Eastwood we're talking about," she said, her voice growing more uncertain. "You're a big deal. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that. I've just started getting the hang of managing this place." Clint smiled slightly, the corners of his mouth turning upward. "I get it. It's a big leap. But you've got the right instincts. And you're already managing. What's the next step for you? Keep running this place or take it to the next level? The way I see it, you've got more potential than you realize, and I'd like to help you tap into it." Sarah felt her throat tighten. What was she saying? This was Clint Eastwood, a name that was synonymous with power, success, and authority. And he was offering to help her. She took a deep breath, trying to clear her mind. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I want you to work with me on expanding this restaurant," Clint said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "You've already helped turn things around here. We could take it to new heights, introduce new locations, maybe even franchise the place. But I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows the ins and outs of what makes a restaurant successful." Sarah's mind raced. This was more than just a job offer, it was a partnership. She would be working alongside Clint, making decisions that could impact not just this restaurant, but an entire brand. The responsibility was massive, but so was the opportunity. "Think about it," Clint continued, sensing her hesitation. "This isn't just about running a restaurant, it's about building something lasting. You have the chance to be part of something that could be bigger than you ever imagined." Sarah's stomach churned with a mix of excitement and fear. She had always dreamed of doing something more with her life, of stepping up and proving herself, not just to others, but to herself. This could be her moment. But could she really handle it? "And what's in it for you?" she asked, trying to wrap her mind around the full scope of what Clint was proposing. "Why me?" Clint leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "You've got something I don't see in many people. Dedication, vision, and a willingness to do what it takes. I'm not just looking for someone to run the business, I need someone who's passionate about making it something special. That's where you come in." The sincerity in his words was undeniable. He wasn't just looking for another manager, he was looking for a partner. Someone who could bring their own unique vision to the table. And for a moment, Sarah saw it. She saw herself at the helm, steering a brand, building something from the ground up. But then, a flicker of doubt crept in. "But what if I fail? What if I can't handle it?" Clint's eyes softened, and he smiled again. "Failure isn't the end, Sarah. It's a lesson. You learn from it, you adapt, and you keep going. The real failure is never trying. Those words struck a chord with her. She had spent so much of her life being afraid of failure, of not measuring up. But here was Clint, telling her that failing wasn't the end. It was just another part of the journey. And that gave her the courage to think beyond her current limitations. Sarah took another deep breath, her mind finally starting to settle on one thing: this was an opportunity. An opportunity to grow, to learn, and to take on a challenge that could change her life. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I'll take the chance." Clint's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with approval. "Good. I'm glad to hear that. We'll start making some moves soon. But you'll need to be prepared for the work ahead. It won't be easy." "I know," Sarah said, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her. But as she looked at Clint, she felt a new sense of excitement take root in her chest. This was it. This was her shot. And she wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. The days following Sarah's conversation with Clint Eastwood felt like they were moving in slow motion. Every part of her was buzzing with the weight of the decision she had just made. She had agreed to step into a partnership with Clint, to help take this restaurant and everything it represented to the next level. At first, it had felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. But as the days stretched on and the reality of the opportunity sank in, the fear started to creep in, too. She was about to embark on a journey unlike anything she'd ever experienced. The stakes had never been higher. One evening, after a particularly busy shift, Sarah found herself standing in front of the mirror in the staff bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her hands gripped the edges of the sink as she tried to steady her breathing. Was she really ready for this? The weight of the responsibility seemed so much heavier now that she was facing it head-on. She had been a manager at the restaurant for a while, but this was different. Clint wasn't asking her to just run the daily operations of a restaurant. He was asking her to shape its future, to create something that would last. What if she wasn't up for it? As if reading her thoughts, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw that it was a text from Clint. "Are you ready for our first meeting tomorrow? Let's start laying the groundwork for what comes next. We've got big plans ahead." Sarah read the message twice, her stomach nodding. Tomorrow. That was it. The real start. She had no choice now but to dive in. There was no going back. Taking a deep breath, Sarah typed a quick reply. "I'm ready. Let's do this." She hit send and placed her phone down, staring at her reflection once more. She was scared, there was no denying that. But something else was stirring deep within her. It was a feeling she hadn't had in a long time: excitement. The kind of excitement that comes when you step into the unknown, when you start pushing yourself beyond what you thought was possible. The fear wasn't going to stop her. Not this time. The next day, Sarah arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, her mind buzzing with questions about what the meeting with Clint would entail. She had no idea what to expect, but the sense of urgency in Clint's message told her that things were about to move fast. When she stepped into the office, Clint was already sitting at the table, his phone in hand, looking over some notes. He looked up as she entered, offering her a nod. "Morning, Sarah," he said. "Glad you're here. We've got a lot to cover." "Good morning, Clint," she replied, trying to keep her nerves in check. Clint gestured for her to sit down. "Take a seat. Let's get started." She settled into the chair across from him, trying to shake off the anxiety that had crept up on her. Clint seemed so composed, so confident, his energy was contagious, and it made her want to rise to the occasion. "Now," Clint began, tapping his fingers on the table, "I want to talk about the future. I've been thinking a lot about the restaurant, the brand, and where we want to go. And I think it's time to make some big moves." Sarah nodded, leaning forward. She knew this was the moment. She had to be sharp. What kind of moves? Clint leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. I want us to expand. Not just another location here and there. I'm talking about a serious expansion, a full-fledged brand with multiple locations. But we'll need to nail down exactly what we stand for first. What makes us different from every other restaurant out there? Sarah's mind raced. Expansion. Multiple locations. This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. But she had worked hard to understand what made the restaurant unique, the way they treated their customers, the atmosphere, the quality of the food. She had always known there was something special about this place, something that set it apart from the rest. I think we have a strong foundation already, she said, her voice more confident than she felt. We've got loyal customers, a great team, and a solid reputation. I think we need to build on that. But we also need to figure out how to maintain that same level of quality and personal touch as we grow. Clint's eyes lit up as he listened to her. Exactly. That's the key. We can't just replicate the same formula everywhere. We need to stay true to what makes us unique. But we also need to be prepared for the challenges that come with growth. There will be bumps in the road. Sarah nodded, her mind racing as she thought about the practical aspects of expansion. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. There were so many factors to consider: location, staff, the logistics of scaling everything up without losing the charm that made the restaurant so special. But she also knew that Clint was right. This could be the chance of a lifetime. Clint continued, I'm also thinking about branding. We need to make sure that when people see our name, they know exactly what to expect. We need to create a strong identity, a clear vision. Branding, Sarah said, more to herself than to Clint. She had never been involved in something like that before, but the idea of crafting a brand, of shaping its identity from the ground up, was thrilling. I know this is a lot to take in, Clint said, noticing the slight tension in her shoulders. But I think you're the person who can help make this happen. You've got the leadership skills, the passion, and the vision to make it work. It won't be easy, but I believe in you. Sarah felt a surge of pride and gratitude. This wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. It was about her potential to create something meaningful, to leave a mark. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. Let's do it. Clint smiled, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. That's what I like to hear. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. But together, I think we can do something incredible. As they began to brainstorm ideas for the future, Sarah felt the weight of the task ahead. But this time, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like a challenge she was ready to take on. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah wasn't afraid of it. She was excited. The first few weeks after Sarah's meeting with Clint Eastwood passed in a blur of excitement, fear, and uncertainty. She had agreed to the partnership, but now the true weight of the responsibility was setting in. She was no longer just a manager, she was about to embark on an entirely new venture that could change her life, and the life of the restaurant, forever. Sarah found herself thinking constantly about the future, mapping out ideas, strategizing, and trying to piece together the puzzle of what expansion would really look like. She had always been good at keeping things organized, running a tight ship when it came to the day-to-day operations of the restaurant. But now she was tasked with shaping the future, making decisions that would affect not just the staff and customers, but the entire brand. The pressure was immense. One late evening, after closing the restaurant, Sarah and Clint sat across from each other in the quiet, dimly lit office. The hum of the refrigerators in the kitchen was the only sound breaking the silence between them. Clint had a stack of papers in front of him, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sarah sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind racing. You ready to dive into this? Clint asked, his voice steady but laced with an underlying excitement. Sarah took a deep breath. Yeah, let's do it. Clint slid a folder across the table to her. "I've been working on a few things. We need to figure out the direction of the brand, what makes us stand out in a crowded market. And then we need to plan how to replicate that in other locations. That's where you come in." Sarah opened the folder to find pages filled with research, notes, and possible marketing strategies. It was a lot to take in, but she could see the thought Clint had already put into this. She was both impressed and overwhelmed. "We need to nail down the core values of the brand," Clint continued, leaning forward. "What do we want people to think when they hear our name? It can't just be about food, it's got to be about an experience. An atmosphere. A feeling. We need a mission that's bigger than the menu." Sarah nodded, flipping through the pages. She had never thought about it this way before, but Clint was right. It wasn't just about running a restaurant. It was about creating a culture, an identity that people would recognize no matter where they went. "We already have a loyal customer base," Sarah said, tapping a pen against the table. "But expanding means attracting new people, too. We need to figure out what makes us unique. What is it that keeps customers coming back, and how can we make that even stronger?" Clint smiled, clearly pleased with her response. "Exactly. We've got the foundation. But now we need to build on it. I want to create a restaurant experience that people can't get anywhere else. You have the pulse on this place, you know what makes it special." Sarah's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and nervousness. She had always known that there was something different about the restaurant. It wasn't just the food, it was the feeling of being welcomed, of being treated like family. That was the heart of the place. But how would they translate that feeling into new locations, into a broader market? How could they maintain that personal touch while expanding? "What if we focus on the idea of family?" Sarah suggested. "Not just in the literal sense, but in the way we treat our customers. We make them feel like they belong here, like they're part of something bigger than just a meal. We could build that into the brand." Clint leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. "I like it. I like it a lot. People want more than just a meal, they want an experience. They want to feel like they're a part of something. That's how we'll differentiate ourselves." They spent the next few hours brainstorming, coming up with ideas for the brand's message, how to design the atmosphere of future locations, and how to create a sense of community that would make each restaurant feel like home. By the end of the night, they had the outline for a concept that felt solid, something that could stand the test of time. But with each idea they discussed, the realization of the challenges ahead loomed larger. How would they find the right locations? How would they hire and train staff to embody the brand? How could they make sure that the quality of the food and the service never slipped, no matter how big the company became? As they wrapped up the meeting, Clint gave her a knowing look. "We're in this together, Sarah. There will be bumps along the way, but that's part of the process. We'll figure it out." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She was in this now. There was no turning back. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah threw herself into the planning with everything she had. She was working alongside Clint and a team of professionals to develop the brand, designing everything from the logo to the layout of the future locations. There were countless meetings, endless paperwork, and late nights spent brainstorming. But amidst all the work, Sarah began to feel something she hadn't in a long time, a sense of purpose. She was no longer just going through the motions, managing a restaurant. She was building something from the ground up, something that could leave a lasting impact. Clint's presence was always reassuring. He was a steady force, guiding her through the tough decisions, offering advice when needed, and challenging her when she needed it. But it wasn't just Clint's wisdom that kept her going, it was the passion she had found for this new journey. She wasn't just managing anymore. She was leading, shaping a vision, and working towards something bigger than herself. But the pressure was real. There were moments when Sarah felt overwhelmed, moments when she doubted herself. There were times when she felt like the weight of the entire project was on her shoulders. She wasn't just trying to prove herself anymore, she was trying to prove that this dream, this vision, could become a reality. One evening, after another long day of planning, Sarah sat in her car in the restaurant parking lot, staring out at the building. She took a deep breath, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Could she really do this? Could she take everything she had learned, everything Clint had taught her, and turn it into something incredible? The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. But now, it wasn't enough to hold her back. She thought about what Clint had said in their first meeting: failure isn't the end. It's a lesson. This was her moment to step up, to take what she had been given and run with it. With a final deep breath, she put the car in gear and drove away, ready for whatever the road ahead would bring. The days were blending into weeks now. Sarah had gotten used to the non-stop hustle, and the strain of constant meetings, paperwork, and planning was starting to take a toll. She was learning more than she ever thought she could about business, branding, and leadership. Yet, despite the excitement of the expansion, there was always that underlying current of tension, a reminder that this wasn't going to be easy. It was one particularly hectic morning when everything seemed to come to a head. Sarah had arrived early, as usual, to go over last-minute details with the team before the lunch rush. Clint was in the office, preparing for a big meeting with potential investors. Today was crucial. The plans for the first new location were going to be pitched, and this was their chance to secure the funding they needed. The tension in the air was palpable. Sarah could feel it in her bones. She had seen the way Clint had been pacing in the office the past few days, how he had become even more meticulous with every detail. This meeting was make or break. Around mid-morning, as Sarah was checking on the kitchen, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Clint: meeting in 30. Need you to come to the office. She immediately excused herself from the kitchen and walked to the office. As soon as she entered, Clint greeted her with a strained smile. "Sarah," Clint began, "I need your help with something important. We've hit a roadblock with the investors." Her heart sank. What happened? Clint ran a hand through his hair. "The projections I sent them, they didn't like the numbers. They think the growth is too aggressive. They're questioning the feasibility of expanding this fast. They want us to scale back the vision." Sarah could hear the frustration in Clint's voice. This was a critical moment, one that could derail their entire plan. She knew that Clint was a seasoned pro, but even he couldn't predict everything. There were so many moving pieces now, and even the slightest miscalculation could cause problems. "We've worked so hard to get this far," Sarah said, trying to keep her own voice steady. "We can't let them stop us now." Clint nodded, his expression grim. "I agree. But we need to convince them. If we can't do that, we'll lose everything: the investment, the momentum, the whole expansion." Sarah took a deep breath, thinking quickly. What if we adjust the plan? Not scale back, but present a more measured approach. Show them a phased plan: start with one location, prove the concept, then scale up slowly. That way, we mitigate risk and still show them our long-term vision. Clint raised an eyebrow, clearly considering the idea. That could work. It gives us a chance to prove ourselves without putting everything on the line right away. Exactly, Sarah said, gaining confidence. We can prove that we're capable of maintaining quality and growth. And once we've shown that, the rest of the investors will be more likely to come on board. Clint stood up, his eyes narrowing as he mulled over her suggestion. "All right, let's do it. I'll revise the numbers, and we'll present them with the new plan." "You're right, this gives us the best chance." But just as Clint was about to walk out of the office to revise the presentation, Sarah's phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen and saw a new message from one of the staff members. "Sarah, we have a problem in the kitchen. Something's wrong with the oven. The morning rush is about to start, and we need it fixed ASAP." Her stomach tightened. This was the last thing they needed right now, another crisis. "I'll handle it," Sarah said, already walking toward the door. "You go meet with the investors. I'll fix this on my end." Clint nodded. "You're a lifesaver, Sarah. Let me know if you need anything." As Sarah hurried to the kitchen, she could feel the weight of the day bearing down on her. The investors were waiting for Clint's presentation, the future of the expansion was on the line, and now the kitchen was falling apart. She didn't have time to feel overwhelmed, though, there was no room for that. When she entered the kitchen, she immediately saw the problem. The oven was malfunctioning, and the crew was scrambling to figure out how to keep up with the orders coming in. It was a disaster waiting to happen. "All right, everyone, listen up," Sarah called out, her voice sharp. "We're not letting this derail us. I need 2 of you to start prepping the backup ovens, and the rest of you, keep working on the orders as best as you can. Don't panic, this is just a bump in the road." The team immediately jumped into action. Sarah's mind was racing, calculating the best way to fix the situation without sacrificing quality. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. It was moments like this that would define her as a leader. She couldn't afford to crack under pressure. As she supervised the team, she quickly called the repair technician, hoping they could fix the oven in time. Time was running out, and with every minute that passed, she could feel the anxiety building. This wasn't just about getting the oven fixed, it was about proving to herself and her team that they could handle whatever came their way. Eventually, the technician arrived and managed to get the oven working again, just in time for the lunch rush. The kitchen was back on track, and the orders flowed in as usual. Sarah stayed calm and collected, moving between stations, offering support to the staff, making sure everything was running smoothly. By the time the rush was over, Sarah was exhausted, but she couldn't afford to rest. She had a meeting with Clint later that afternoon to go over the revised pitch for the investors. There was no time to celebrate the small victories. Not yet. That afternoon, Clint returned to the restaurant, looking more tense than ever. He pulled Sarah aside, his eyes reflecting the pressure of the day. "The investors want us to meet in an hour. I've updated the presentation with the new phased plan, but I'm still not sure if it's enough." "They're tough, Sarah." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Let's go over it together one more time. We need to nail this." The 2 of them sat down, going over the numbers, discussing the new strategy. As Sarah helped Clint refine the presentation, she realized something. This was more than just about numbers and investors. This was about building trust, trust in themselves, trust in their vision, and trust that they could weather the storms together. They weren't just selling a restaurant, they were selling a dream. When they finally walked into the meeting with the investors, Sarah felt a strange calm wash over her. She had faced countless obstacles in her life, but none as daunting as this. And yet, in that moment, she knew something had changed within her. She wasn't just reacting to the pressure anymore. She was embracing it. This was her moment. The meeting with the investors was scheduled for the late afternoon, and as the clock ticked closer to the hour, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Sarah stood in the back of the room, nervously checking her phone one last time for any last-minute updates. Clint, sitting at the head of the table, was calm but his rigid posture betrayed his anxiety. The investors, for sharp-looking professionals, sat across from Clint, each of them flipping through the new business plan Clint had revised. Their serious expressions gave nothing away, making it impossible to read what they were thinking. Clint cleared his throat and began his pitch. His voice was steady, but Sarah could tell he was under pressure. She knew that this was more than just about numbers, it was about the vision they had built together. It was about believing in themselves, in the restaurant's future, and, most of all, in the dream they were now fighting for. "Thank you for giving us the chance to present our revised proposal," Clint said, glancing at Sarah briefly as if to reassure himself. "We understand the need to approach expansion with caution, and that's why we've reworked the plan to focus on a phased strategy. We want to prove that our concept works on a smaller scale before scaling up. Sarah stood at the side, trying to remain composed, but her mind was racing. She had spent weeks poring over the numbers with Clint, refining the strategy to show growth while minimizing risk. The idea of a more measured approach was designed to make the investors feel secure, but now it was out of their hands. The lead investor, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s, set down the business plan and looked directly at Clint. "We appreciate the adjustments you've made," she said, her voice thoughtful but not overly warm. "But I have to ask, how do you intend to keep the quality consistent while scaling? You're talking about replicating a concept that's worked so well in one location. The logistics of maintaining that level of excellence, especially with new staff, can be difficult." Clint responded quickly, his voice steady. "I understand the concerns, and that's exactly why we're focusing on the phased approach. By proving the concept in one location first, we can develop the infrastructure we need to ensure consistency, from kitchen to service. We'll take time to train each new team and implement systems that maintain the culture we've built here." The investors exchanged glances, their poker faces making it impossible for Sarah to decipher anything. They were interested, but there was no guarantee. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest as Clint continued presenting the numbers, profit margins, projected growth, and a detailed breakdown of how they would launch the first new location. Sarah couldn't help but think of the pressure Clint had been under in the past few days, the weight of this meeting hanging over them. But it wasn't just his burden to bear anymore. They were in this together. At last, the lead investor spoke again. "The phased approach is sensible. However, we need more than just a timeline and numbers. We need to know that you're ready for the unexpected, the challenges you will face that no one sees coming. How will you handle setbacks? What's your plan if things don't go as smoothly as you anticipate?" Clint's gaze shifted to Sarah, and for a brief moment, she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. This wasn't just about the numbers anymore. It was about the vision they had shared and the countless hours of work that had brought them to this moment. They had to convince these investors that they were not only capable but resilient. Without hesitating, Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "If there's one thing I've learned from Clint, and from running this restaurant, it's that no plan goes exactly as expected. There will be setbacks. But our strength is in our ability to adapt and solve problems quickly. We don't wait for the solutions to come to us, we find them. And we're committed to doing whatever it takes to make this work." She paused, looking at the investors. "We've faced challenges in the past, whether it was staffing issues or unexpected repairs, and we've always come out stronger on the other side. The key is that we don't let those obstacles define us. We face them head-on and keep moving forward." There was a long pause. The investors seemed to be contemplating her words, and Sarah felt her palms grow slick with sweat. She had spoken from the heart, but would it be enough? Finally, the lead investor leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Well said. I'm impressed with the thought and resilience you've both shown in this proposal. It's clear you've put in the work. I think we can work with this." Sarah held her breath as the investors exchanged looks. The tension was almost unbearable, but then, the lead investor extended her hand toward Clint. "We're in," she said. "We'll support this venture, with the understanding that we'll keep a close eye on progress and be prepared to adjust as necessary. But we believe in you both." Clint's face lit up with a huge grin. "Thank you," he said, shaking her hand. "You won't regret this." As the meeting wrapped up, the room buzzed with a mixture of excitement and relief. Sarah could hardly believe what had just happened. They had secured the funding they needed to move forward. Clint turned to Sarah with a proud smile. "We did it." She grinned back, her heart soaring. "We did it." As Sarah and Clint walked out of the meeting room, the weight of what they had just accomplished began to sink in. They had done it, they had won over the investors. This was a huge step toward making their dream of expansion a reality. But Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be filled with even more challenges, and there would be moments when it seemed like everything was on the line. She was ready for that. They both were. "I have to say, Sarah," Clint said as they walked down the hallway, "you really came through today. That speech you gave, that was the turning point." Sarah smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude for Clint. "I couldn't have done it without you." Clint chuckled. "We make a good team." As they stepped out into the fresh air, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. It was a victory. They had pushed through their first major hurdle, but Sarah knew that the real test had only just begun. There were more obstacles ahead, more decisions to make, but for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a wave of optimism. The dream was within their reach. And no matter what came next, they were in this together. It had been a week since they secured the investors' support. Clint and Sarah were riding the high of the moment, yet they both knew that a new set of challenges awaited. The first expansion, the big leap from the original location to a second, was about to become their reality. The stakes had never been higher. The phone calls, meetings, and emails were endless. There was so much to plan: location scouting, hiring staff, designing the space, and ensuring the kitchen equipment was up to par. It wasn't just about opening a second restaurant anymore, it was about proving they could replicate their success. It was about showing the world that their vision was worth trusting. As Sarah sat at her desk, going through the detailed plans, Clint entered the office with a slight grin on his face. "Guess what?" Clint asked, his eyes twinkling with excitement. Sarah looked up from the stack of papers. "What now? Did we lose our perfect location?" Clint shook his head, holding up a letter. "Nope. Actually, something better." He handed her the letter, and Sarah scanned the page. It was a press invitation. A local magazine wanted to feature their restaurant as part of a series about successful small businesses. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was huge. It was a chance to get their story out there, to make a name for themselves before the expansion even started. "This is incredible!" Sarah exclaimed, her eyes wide. "This could be the publicity we need." Clint leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "It's great, but it also means we're going to have a lot more eyes on us now. The pressure's on. Are we ready for that?" Sarah hesitated. The spotlight was both a blessing and a curse. She had been working so hard on the logistics and business details that she hadn't fully considered the implications of increased visibility. They had worked so hard to get here, this was their chance to shine, but could they live up to the hype? "We'll handle it," she said, finally. "We've been handling everything so far, and we're not stopping now. We've got this." Clint smiled, though there was still a hint of nervousness in his eyes. "All right, but we need to make sure everything's perfect before that interview." No pressure. The day of the interview arrived, and Sarah could feel the nervous excitement buzzing through her veins. The magazine reporter, a young woman named Maya, arrived just after noon, with a photographer in tow. Maya was friendly, but professional. She immediately began asking about their origins, how they started the restaurant, and what inspired their unique menu. Sarah and Clint answered questions confidently, but there was a strange tension between them. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. The stakes were higher now, not just for their restaurant, but for their personal reputations as well. This article could make or break their ability to secure future funding or even attract new customers. Maya's questions were insightful, and she was genuinely interested in the business, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the pressure was becoming too much. Every answer had to be perfect. Every word had to sound like it came from an expert, from someone who had all the answers. As the interview wrapped up, Maya and the photographer stood up to leave. "Thank you so much," Maya said with a warm smile. "This has been great. The article will be out next week." Clint and Sarah exchanged a glance as they waved goodbye to the team, but as soon as the door closed behind them, the reality of it all hit Sarah. The restaurant had been a place of comfort, of hard work and determination. But now, it was becoming something else, a symbol, a brand, something that everyone was watching. What if they failed? Clint noticed her hesitation. "Hey, are you okay?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm fine. It's just, this feels like a lot of pressure all of a sudden." "I get it," Clint replied, walking toward her. "But we're ready for it. We've been working toward this for years. Now, we just need to keep doing what we've been doing." "Yeah," Sarah said, trying to muster a smile. "You're right. Let's do this." That evening, as Sarah sat alone in her office, reviewing the expansion plans yet again, her phone buzzed. It was a text from one of the chefs. "Sarah, something's wrong with the freezer. We're gonna need help ASAP." Her stomach churned. They couldn't afford another crisis. Not now. Without thinking twice, Sarah grabbed her jacket and headed to the kitchen. She arrived to find the freezer completely down. Several $1,000s worth of ingredients were at risk of spoiling. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "We can't figure out what happened," one of the chefs explained. "It just stopped working, and the temperature is rising. Everything will go bad if we don't fix this fast." Sarah felt the weight of the situation press down on her. This wasn't just about fixing the freezer, it was about maintaining the reputation they had worked so hard to build. One mistake could derail everything. "Okay, let's think," Sarah said, her mind racing. "Call the repair company, but in the meantime, we'll start moving the ingredients to the backup freezer. We don't have time to waste." As the staff worked quickly to save what they could, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Clint. "Are you okay? I heard about the freezer. I'll be there in 5. Sarah wiped her brow, glancing at the chaotic scene in the kitchen. They had to fix this. They couldn't afford another failure, not when they were so close to the launch. When Clint arrived, he immediately jumped into action. He coordinated the staff, helped move ingredients, and even took a few calls from the repair company to speed up the process. Together, they managed to save most of the stock, though it would be a while before they could fix the freezer. As they stood in the kitchen, the chaos dying down, Clint let out a sigh of relief. "Well, that was a close one." Sarah nodded, exhausted. "We just can't seem to catch a break, can we?" Clint smiled, though it was weary. "No, but that's the nature of this business. We can't control everything. What we can control is how we handle it." Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Clint was right. They couldn't predict every setback, but they could handle it together. No matter what came next, they had each other, and they had the strength to keep moving forward. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from over. The week following the freezer disaster was a blur of repairs, planning, and tension. Sarah and Clint were running on fumes, but neither of them complained. There was a new energy in the restaurant, and despite the obstacles they had faced, they had managed to keep everything running smoothly. Yet, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. The pressure had been building for months, and it was starting to show. As they entered the restaurant one morning, Sarah noticed a strange quietness. The usual hum of chatter and clinking dishes was missing. A few regulars were sitting in the corner, but it wasn't the full rush they had grown accustomed to. Clint saw it too. "We've got a slow day ahead of us." Sarah frowned. "Yeah, I noticed that too. This isn't like us." They tried to brush it off. A slow day wasn't the end of the world. But as the hours passed and the lunch crowd failed to show up, the unease began to creep back into Sarah's thoughts. By the time the dinner service began, the restaurant was still unusually quiet. The phones weren't ringing with reservations, and the usual influx of hungry patrons hadn't materialized. Clint tried to hide his concern, but Sarah could see it in his eyes. Something wasn't right. Just as Sarah was starting to panic, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the local food review site. A bad review. One that she hadn't expected. It wasn't a scathing critique, but it was clear that something about the restaurant hadn't lived up to the reviewer's expectations. The review mentioned a lack of consistency in the food, with one dish being underseasoned and another too salty. It wasn't terrible, but for a restaurant that prided itself on its quality, it was a blow. Clint walked over, sensing Sarah's tension. "What's going on?" "I don't know," she said, holding up her phone. "It's not awful, but it's not great either." Clint sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, we can't ignore it. We need to respond." Sarah nodded, but her heart was heavy. This wasn't just about one bad review. This felt like the beginning of something bigger. The restaurant's reputation had been built on trust, on word of mouth from loyal customers. One negative review could spread like wildfire. What if this was the beginning of a downward spiral? "We'll fix this," Clint said, trying to reassure her. "We'll talk to the kitchen, figure out what happened, and get ahead of it." Sarah nodded, though she still felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. She wasn't sure how much longer they could keep pushing without breaking. The following days were filled with frantic adjustments. Clint worked with the chefs to ensure that the food quality remained top-notch, making sure every dish was perfected before it left the kitchen. Sarah focused on customer outreach, writing a polite but firm response to the review, apologizing for the inconsistency, and offering to make it right for the customer. The response seemed to calm some nerves, but the quiet lull persisted. They had tried everything, but the restaurant still wasn't seeing the same volume of customers as before. It was frustrating, and Sarah couldn't help but feel defeated. That afternoon, while Sarah was speaking to the manager about a potential private event they had lined up, Clint pulled her aside, his face serious. "Hey, I've been thinking," he began. "We might need to change things up a bit. I think we need a bit of a refresh." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A refresh?" "Yeah, something to grab attention. Maybe a new menu item or a limited-time dish. We need to get people talking again. We can't just wait for the old crowd to come back." Sarah thought about it for a moment. It was risky, but they had to do something. The longer they waited, the more it seemed like the restaurant was fading from the spotlight. "Let's do it," she said, a new determination in her voice. "Let's make something bold. Something that'll get people excited again." They spent the rest of the day brainstorming ideas. They decided to introduce a new dish, something fresh and unexpected, a twist on an old favorite, using ingredients they had never tried before. It would be a limited-time offer, just enough to draw people in and create buzz. By the end of the night, they had their plan. The next morning, they would launch their new creation, and hopefully, it would be just the thing they needed to reignite the fire under the restaurant. The day of the launch, Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nerves. They had decided to hold a small event, inviting regulars, influencers, and local food bloggers to sample the new dish. It was a gamble, but it was their best shot at sparking interest again. As the doors opened for lunch, the first wave of guests trickled in. Clint and Sarah moved swiftly, making sure the kitchen was running smoothly, ensuring the servers were ready for the influx. The new dish was being featured heavily on the menu, and Sarah could already feel the change in the air. People were curious. The event was a success. The reviews started rolling in, positive, enthusiastic comments from the local influencers who had tasted the new dish, with many of them posting about it on social media. By the end of the day, the restaurant had regained some of its energy. The buzz was building, and Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. But just as things seemed to be turning around, Sarah received another text. This one was from the same food reviewer who had left the negative comment earlier. "I tried your new dish. It was amazing. I'll be updating my review to reflect the change. Keep it up. Sarah smiled. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had taken the first step toward restoring their reputation. As the night wound down and the restaurant slowly emptied, Clint and Sarah sat at their usual table, quietly celebrating their small victory. It wasn't a complete turnaround, but it was enough to make them feel like they had some control again. Clint leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. That was close. Sarah nodded. Yeah, but we're still here. And we're not giving up. No, we're not, Clint agreed. But I think we've learned something important today. What's that? The world doesn't just hand you success. You have to fight for it. Every day, every decision. But we can handle it. Together. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Yeah, together. And as they looked around the restaurant, it wasn't just the food that seemed to have been revived. It was their spirit. The spark they had always shared, the drive to push forward no matter what came their way, was alive and burning brighter than ever. The restaurant had regained its momentum, but Sarah knew all too well that success wasn't a guarantee. They had weathered one storm, but more were likely to come. As the weeks passed, Sarah and Clint continued to push forward, carefully monitoring every detail, from the quality of the food to the guest experience. Yet, beneath the surface of their growing success, there was a feeling of exhaustion creeping in, one that neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. It was a Monday morning when Sarah first felt it. She woke up earlier than usual, unable to shake the weight of everything pressing on her shoulders. The restaurant was busy again, which was a relief, but she couldn't help but wonder, was it sustainable? She had already seen how quickly things could shift, how one bad day or one negative review could put them right back at square one. Clint was already up, his back to her as he stood at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone. When he saw her enter, he greeted her with a tired smile. "Morning." "Morning," Sarah replied, her voice quieter than usual. She walked over to the counter, pouring herself a cup of coffee. As she did, her eyes flicked to the stack of papers and the pile of to-do lists cluttering the kitchen island. "Long night?" Clint asked, sensing her hesitation. Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah. I couldn't sleep. There's just so much to do. And I keep thinking, what if it's not enough? What if we make one wrong move and everything crumbles?" Clint's expression softened, and he walked over to her. "I get it. It's a lot of pressure. But we've been doing this for months now, and we've come so far. We're still standing, Sarah." She met his gaze, but it didn't reassure her. She didn't just fear failure, it was more than that. It was the constant strain, the toll it was taking on their lives. The restaurant was everything to them, but what were they losing along the way? "Clint, I've been thinking," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "What if we're so focused on this place that we're losing sight of everything else? What about us?" Clint blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, us. Our relationship. Our time together. I don't even remember the last time we had a real break, or when we just spent time together without talking about the restaurant. I feel like I've been giving so much to this place, but I don't know if it's worth losing ourselves over." Clint was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. The truth in her words was undeniable. They had been so consumed by the restaurant's success and survival that they had forgotten the simple pleasures that used to bind them together. "I don't want to lose us either," Clint said, his voice gentle but full of resolve. "But we're so close, Sarah. We're almost there. The restaurant is getting to a place where it might actually be sustainable. We just need a little more time. Then we can take a step back, recharge." Sarah shook her head. "That's what I've been telling myself. But I don't know if I can keep going like this. Not without something changing." The conversation hung in the air between them, heavy with unsaid words. Sarah didn't want to walk away from the dream they had built, but she also didn't want to wake up one day and find that they had lost each other in the process. "I need to think about this," she said quietly, setting her coffee cup down and stepping away from the counter. "I just don't know how much longer I can keep going without something shifting." Clint's eyes followed her, and for a moment, he looked like he was about to say something. But instead, he simply nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." The next few days were a whirlwind. Sarah threw herself into work, pushing aside the thoughts that had been keeping her up at night. But no matter how busy she kept herself, the feeling of burnout lingered. As the restaurant hummed along, Clint did his best to keep the ship steady. He managed the day-to-day operations, ensuring everything was running smoothly. But even he couldn't ignore the subtle changes in Sarah, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes, the way she seemed distracted, and the way she took fewer breaks than she used to. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her office with a stack of paperwork, Clint knocked gently on the door. He had his hands in his pockets, his face calm but full of concern. "Sarah," he began, "I know you're trying to push through, but you've been burning yourself out. I can see it. We need to talk about taking a step back. We can't keep going at this pace." Sarah looked up at him, her heart heavy. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say that they couldn't afford to stop now, not when they were so close to everything they had worked for. But the exhaustion in his eyes mirrored her own, and she couldn't deny it any longer. "I've been thinking the same thing," she admitted. "I think we need to find a way to balance this, before we burn out completely." Clint sat down across from her, his expression softening. "We've built something incredible here, but we can't sacrifice everything to keep it going. Maybe it's time to bring in more help. Maybe it's time to delegate some of the responsibilities." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "I've been so afraid of losing control. What if it all falls apart if we let go of certain things?" Clint reached out and placed a hand over hers. "It's okay to let go, Sarah. Trust the people around us. Trust me. We don't have to do this alone." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to breathe deeply. The weight she had been carrying for so long began to lift, just a little. Maybe Clint was right. Maybe they didn't have to do everything themselves. Later that day, Clint and Sarah sat down together and began brainstorming. They discussed hiring more managers for the restaurant, bringing in an assistant who could help with the administrative side of things, and creating a more sustainable schedule that allowed them both time to recharge. It wasn't about stepping away from the business entirely, it was about creating balance, a healthier way forward. They agreed to take the first step by posting a job listing for an assistant manager. It wasn't an easy decision for Sarah, but she knew it was the right one. The restaurant would continue to thrive, but it would no longer come at the cost of their happiness or their relationship. The next few months were transformative. As they brought in new team members and delegated more responsibilities, Sarah and Clint found themselves with more free time than they had had in a long while. They spent weekends away from the restaurant, reconnected over dinner dates, and began to rekindle the spark that had first brought them together. The restaurant flourished, not just because of the quality of the food or the loyal customers, but because Sarah and Clint had learned that success didn't mean sacrificing everything that mattered most. The months that followed marked a turning point in Sarah and Clint's journey. The restaurant was thriving. The new team members they had brought on board were proving to be a valuable asset, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah and Clint were able to step back and breathe. Their work-life balance was no longer a distant dream, it had become a reality. They took the time to reconnect, to nurture their relationship, and to focus on the things outside of the restaurant that made them whole. But as they celebrated their successes and finally started to enjoy the fruits of their labor, an unexpected event came crashing into their world, one that would test everything they had worked for. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Sarah received an email notification on her phone. She didn't think much of it at first, but when she saw the name of the sender, her heart skipped a beat. The subject line was simple, from Mr. Eastwood. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Clint Eastwood. The name alone sent a wave of confusion through her. She had been hearing that name for years, of course, and Clint had even joked about it on more than one occasion. But she never imagined she'd be receiving an email from him. She clicked on the message. Sarah. I hope this finds you well. I wanted to reach out personally to let you know that I've been following the progress of your restaurant. I've been impressed by what you and Clint have built, and I'd like to discuss a potential partnership. Please get in touch when you have a chance. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. Sarah's hands were shaking as she read the message over and over, trying to process the gravity of it all. She quickly turned to Clint, who had just entered the office, a coffee cup in hand. When she showed him the email, he stared at it for a moment, as if the words hadn't fully registered. Well, that's unexpected, he said, his voice filled with equal parts confusion and excitement. I don't even know what to think, Sarah replied, still in shock. This could be a joke, right? Or a mistake. Clint took a deep breath and sat down next to her. I don't think it's a mistake. I've heard rumors over the years that he's been involved in some business ventures, but this? It feels different. It feels real. Sarah chewed her lip. What if it's not? What if we're just being set up for some kind of prank? Or worse, what if he's just playing with us? Clint placed his hand on hers, trying to calm her. There's only one way to find out. We respond. We schedule a meeting. We've come this far, Sarah. We can handle this. Whatever happens. With Clint's encouragement, Sarah took a deep breath and composed a response to Mr. Eastwood. She kept it professional but sincere, thanking him for his kind words and expressing interest in discussing the potential partnership. Within an hour, she received a reply, and the meeting was set. The days leading up to the meeting felt surreal. The restaurant was bustling with the usual crowd, but Sarah couldn't shake the thought of Clint Eastwood coming to their humble establishment. What did this mean for their future? Was this the opportunity of a lifetime? Or was it too good to be true? When the day of the meeting arrived, Clint and Sarah were both nervous. The restaurant had been prepared to impress. They had the best staff on hand, the finest ingredients for the dishes, and they even went as far as to ensure the ambience was perfect. They were determined to make a good impression. Clint Eastwood arrived at the restaurant a little before noon. His presence was understated. He didn't have the usual entourage or fanfare one might expect from a celebrity of his stature. He was dressed casually, in a simple jacket and jeans, but the aura of his fame was undeniable. The room seemed to pause as he entered, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement mixed with anxiety. He approached the counter, where Sarah and Clint were standing. With a warm smile, he extended his hand. Sarah. Clint. It's a pleasure to finally meet you both. The moment his hand touched theirs, it felt like a surreal moment in time. It wasn't just Clint Eastwood the actor or the director, it was Clint Eastwood the man, the businessman, standing before them, interested in their restaurant. Thank you so much for coming, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. It's my pleasure, Clint Eastwood replied, glancing around the restaurant. I've been hearing great things about your place. The food, the atmosphere, there's something real here. Something special. The three of them sat down at a table, and the conversation began. Sarah and Clint listened intently as Eastwood spoke of his interest in the restaurant business, his desire to support small, family-run businesses like theirs, and his vision for how they could collaborate. You've done an incredible job, he said, looking directly at Sarah and Clint. And I believe there's an opportunity here to do even more, to grow this place into something even bigger. I don't want to take over. I'm not here to change what you've built. I just want to be a part of it. Sarah's mind was racing. This was happening. They were actually sitting with Clint Eastwood, discussing a potential partnership. She couldn't deny that it was tempting. The financial backing he could provide, the connections he had, this was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. But at the same time, Sarah hesitated. This wasn't just about expanding the restaurant. This was about maintaining their core values, their vision. She didn't want the heart of what they had built to be lost in the pursuit of success. "I appreciate everything you've said," Sarah replied carefully. "But I have to be honest with you, what's most important to us is maintaining the integrity of this place. We've built something that's ours, from the ground up. We don't want to compromise that." Clint Eastwood nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. And that's exactly why I'm interested. You've created something real, something authentic. I believe in preserving that while helping you reach new heights." The conversation continued, with Clint outlining what he had in mind for the partnership. There were no pressure tactics, no fast talk. It was clear that he respected their vision and wanted to help them succeed, on their terms. As the meeting came to a close, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't a joke, and this wasn't some fly-by-night scheme. This was an opportunity to take the restaurant to new heights, but on their terms. "I think we're ready to move forward," Sarah said, looking at Clint. "But we want to make sure everything stays true to our values." Eastwood smiled. "That's exactly what I want too. Let's make something incredible together." As he left the restaurant, Clint and Sarah stood in silence for a moment, processing everything that had just transpired. "Well," Clint said, his voice filled with awe, "that was something." Sarah smiled, her heart full of both excitement and relief. "Yeah. It was." For Sarah and Clint, the future was suddenly full of possibilities. The journey was far from over, but they had just taken the first step toward something bigger than they had ever imagined. The days following the meeting with Clint Eastwood were a blur. The magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in as Sarah and Clint found themselves overwhelmed with excitement, anticipation, and a little bit of nervousness. They had just entered uncharted territory, and though it felt exhilarating, there was still a lot of uncertainty about what this partnership would mean for the future of their restaurant, and their lives. Clint had left the meeting with a sense of hope, but also with questions lingering in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment that would define everything they had worked for. It wasn't just about the money or the potential fame that could come with Clint Eastwood's name attached to the restaurant. It was about preserving what they had created while taking it to a new level. Sarah, too, felt torn. She had always dreamed of their restaurant becoming successful, but success had never been about becoming a corporate machine or losing the personal touch that had made their restaurant so special. She had to admit that the offer Clint Eastwood presented was enticing, but she wasn't ready to lose herself, her identity, or the soul of their business. They spent the next few days talking things over, carefully weighing the pros and cons. They spoke with trusted friends, sought advice from mentors, and spent countless hours discussing the terms of the partnership. And through it all, one thing became clear: this was a chance to grow, but they needed to ensure that their restaurant remained true to what had made it great in the first place. As the week came to a close, Sarah and Clint made their decision. They were going to move forward with Clint Eastwood, but with a few key conditions. They would retain full control over the restaurant's day-to-day operations, maintaining their creative vision and the intimate atmosphere that had made their establishment so beloved. Clint Eastwood's involvement would provide financial backing and strategic guidance, but they would never compromise their core values or the authenticity of their restaurant. They sent Clint Eastwood a message, outlining their terms and expressing their excitement to move forward together. Within hours, they received a reply. "I respect your vision and your commitment to what you've built. I believe in you both, and I'm excited to work with you. Let's make something incredible happen." The relief that washed over Sarah and Clint was palpable. They had found a way to make it work, a way that respected their vision while also giving them the resources they needed to take the next step. It was the perfect balance, and they were both ready for it. The partnership began to take shape quickly. With Eastwood's financial backing, they expanded their team, hired new chefs, and opened up additional locations. But even as they grew, they made sure that each new venture remained grounded in the same principles that had made the original restaurant so successful. They didn't lose their focus on quality, on relationships with their customers, or on creating a place where people felt at home. In the months that followed, the restaurant became more popular than ever. People flocked to dine at the new locations, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. They attracted a loyal following, many of whom had first visited when the restaurant was just a small, humble space. And while Clint Eastwood's name on the door added an air of prestige, it was still the food, the ambience, and the connection to the people that kept them coming back. For Sarah and Clint, the experience was humbling. They had built something together, a dream that had seemed impossible when they first started. They had faced every challenge with determination, love, and the unwavering belief that they could create something meaningful. And now, with Clint Eastwood's support, they were able to take that dream further than they had ever imagined. But through it all, they never forgot what truly mattered. One evening, as they stood together in the original restaurant, watching the familiar faces of their regular customers enjoy their meals, Clint turned to Sarah. "We did it," he said quietly, his eyes full of pride. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "We did it. But we couldn't have done it alone." Clint nodded, his gaze softening. "We still can't. But that's what makes it special, right?" Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Has there ever been a moment when you had to make a life-changing decision, and you weren't sure which path to take? How did you know it was the right choice? Sarah and Clint had learned that success wasn't just about achieving your goals, it was about maintaining the values and relationships that got you there. As they looked toward the future, they knew that no matter how big the restaurant grew, it would always be a place where people could come together, share stories, and find a little piece of themselves in every meal. And for them, that was worth everything.